Good afternoon, or perhaps good morning, depending where you are in the world. Thank you for joining the webinar. This is today's CanCertainty Hot Topics webinar. If you visited or taken part in previous series that we've done with Bob Bick and the team at CanCertainty, you'll know that these are an opportunity for experts and others to weigh in on some of the really important issues affecting access to cancer medicines in Canada. And today is among the hottest of topics. It is most favored nation and the future of cancer drug access in Canada. I'm Bill Dempster, president of 360 Public Affairs, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So, MFN, I'll explain a little bit more about that. The US has moved forward with this drug pricing policy that is intended to lower prices for American patients. But as with many US policy changes, the impact will not stop at the border, at the 49th parallel, because Canada is one of the countries used as a benchmark for international drug prices. So MFN could influence when, whether, and how new cancer medicines are researched and developed in Canada. A quick word on logistics before we get into it, and I'll introduce the panelists. Maybe I'll just share my slides briefly too. Share. We're going to reserve some time for audience questions. There's going to be a panel Q&A at the bottom. Please send your questions using that panel. If your question is directed to a specific panelist, please include that person's name at the start. If you want to follow along in another language, en français ou n'importe quel, captions are also available. You can click more and then show captions and then select your preferred language. So our goal today is practical. First, to understand what MFN is, to understand why it matters for Canada, understand what it could mean for patients and the cancer community, and what Canada can do now and going forward to protect timely access to innovative therapies. So I'm going to introduce we've done the logistics. I should have shown that during the logistics discussion. I'll introduce today's panel. We've got an incredible group of experts with different perspectives on the issue. We've got Bob Bick, co-lead of CanCertainty, Dr. Dave Stewart, medical oncologist and co-chair and founder of the Life Saving Therapies Network, or LISTEN. And I should also say that both Bob and Dave are involved in the Cancer Clinician Advocacy Forum, which has got, I think, over 40 clinicians who are working on access to better cancer care across Canada. We're also joined by Lorene Redding, Head of Value Access and Pricing and Patient Solutions at Gilead Sciences, and Laura Dawson, Founder and Executive Director of the Future Border Coalition. We did a similar roundtable with Laura's group a while ago, and 360 Public Affairs has actually joined Future Borders Coalition. Laura, we're very impressed that you were able to still come to this webinar today, because I'm sure your phone is ringing off the hook with everything that's happening in DC. We're going to kick it back to each of the panelists, but I'm going to invite Bob to provide just a couple of words on CanCertainty and the purpose of this webinar series.
Thanks, Bill. So as Bill said, I think today's Hot Topics webinar is certainly one of our hottest topics. As you probably know, CanCertainty's purpose is to try and shape policy to improve access to cancer treatments for patients. And it's our fear that the most favored nation policy has the potential to be one of our biggest treatment access challenges. So the question that we're going to be dealing with today is, of course, how will Canadian policymakers and payers and patients respond to MFN? Will we invest in more timely access to medications, or will we begin to see new innovative therapies increasingly unavailable to Canadians, which is certainly not an option any of us want to consider. So I'm, like everyone else here today, I'm excited to hear the perspectives from about the broader U.S.-Canada policy environment and the rationale behind MFN, and of course the industry perspective on MFN. And of course, I'm always looking forward to Dr. David Stewart's frank views on what MFN could mean for cancer care in Canada. So I'm looking forward to getting started here. Thanks, Bill.
Thanks so much, Bob. So I'm going to actually set the stage briefly around what MFN is, how it's being implemented, some early signals we're seeing internationally and in Canada, what it means or could mean for Canadians, and hopefully we'll have some discussion on what Canadians can do about it. But that I'll save a lot of that for the discussion. So let me just flip back over to my slide deck. Here we go. So what is MFN? MFN stands for Most Favored Nation Pricing. And the basic idea is that the United States wants to tie what it pays for certain medicines to the lowest prices paid in other high income countries. And so the rationale is relatively intuitive or straightforward from the US perspective. The US pays among the highest or arguably the highest drug prices in the world, although interestingly, it pays among the lowest for generic drugs in the world, or much lower than Canada anyway. And the Trump administration has argued that other countries should contribute more to the cost of global pharmaceutical innovation. The way that they did this is back in May 2025, President Trump signed an executive order on MFN pricing with the goal of lowering U.S. drug costs to the lowest price in a developed country with GDP per capita of at least 60% of the U.S. GDP per capita. And in terms of what this means, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But in terms of the per capita spending on new innovative medicines as a share of GDP per capita, this is according to an Ernst & Young report last year, and based on 2023 data, the U.S. spends 0.78%, so less than, about 4/5 of 1% of its GDP. And Canada spends 0.32. And so that is definitely the goal of the U.S. government, is to change those numbers. Not necessarily change how much they spend as a percentage, but certainly do something and through pricing. So how is MFN being implemented? Well, through a number of tracks. One is bilateral deals. There have been 17 major medicine developers that have signed deals with the White House that have committed to MFN pricing on new launches, to secure Medicaid price parity across existing portfolios, and participating in direct-to-consumer purchasing. In exchange, they will have tariff immunity for the term of those agreements, which is actually really important for those companies because they're actually importing a lot of the active pharmaceutical ingredients and other inputs for those medicines to the US, where there's a lot of manufacturing that happens. And then, of course, that's where they make most of their sales. The other MFN models are Globe and Guard. Some are voluntary and one is proposed. Generous is voluntary, but it represents a huge opportunity for the pharmaceutical sector that can get preferential access or faster access. And that market alone is, I think, 10 times the size of Canada's market in Canada. And then there's a proposed mandatory track that would be potentially brought forward through legislation, and that's not happening quite yet, but it is proposed, and we'll see. It's not just a theoretical signal or issue that we're talking about. It's being implemented. It's actually having major impacts outside of the United States. And I'll just give an example in Europe. This is a review that was published, I think, by Reuters earlier this year in March, where there was a 35% drop in launches compared to the year before, and that's going back. That's when it started. They actually tracked it back to May 2025 when the executive order was signed. We're seeing some early signals here in Canada too. A number of, I should say, the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, which negotiates with on behalf of all public payers in Canada, is seeing failed negotiations at a rate of 3 times what it normally would see at this time of the year. We've got 16 medicines that have failed to reach a letter of intent or negotiated terms. At least one of those we understand is specifically tied to MFN. The other ones, we're not so sure. But we have seen an important cardiovascular drug pulled from the Danish market because of global pricing issues, and similar issues happen in Asia and elsewhere. So This is real. I'm not here by any stretch to defend MFN policy. It's actually really bad economic policy from a market efficiency perspective. As anyone who reads The Economist and follows the now, I think, 30-year-old Big Mac Index, they just celebrated their anniversary. Prices differ across different borders because of differences in incomes, costs, health systems, willingness to pay, et cetera. So for markets generally to work, uh, suppliers need room to price according to local capacity and local issues. So external reference pricing, which is really what MFN is, tries to flatten those differences, but it actually creates inefficiencies and it actually you have the effect of reducing the total global revenue available to whatever you're trying to procure, either a Big Mac or, in this case, something that's much more important for people's health, which is pharmaceuticals. And Canada is not completely clean hands on this from an economics issue either. We've been using external reference pricing for decades now. The PMPRB, the Federal Price Review Board, actually makes reference to the basket of 11 comparator countries when we review our patented medicines. MFN is different than that because for the first time, it's the world's largest pharma market that's trying to tether its prices to those in other jurisdictions. A majority of global pharmaceutical revenue comes from the US. Canada represents a fraction of global drug spending, just around 2%. So this honestly changes the economics for pharmaceuticals in Canada regarding launch sequencing and pricing decisions. And we're already seeing some of those shifts happen as we speak. So we've got some jurisdictions that are paying attention and standing up and reacting. And the UK has agreed to pay more for new medicines. They've increased their value threshold, and they've agreed to double the spending on innovation by 2036 in exchange for tariff relief. Sweden is looking at what it's willing to pay, citing launch delays and its worry there. And Switzerland is weighing a dedicated fund for new medicines so it does not become a low price benchmark. And we're seeing some similar things happen in Japan and other jurisdictions as well. So what MFN means or could mean for Canada? Well, if Canadian prices help set US benchmarks, there may be an issue about launching here too early or at too low a price, which might jeopardize revenues in the United States. And the result could be delayed access, fewer launches, reduced clinical trial activity, less research investment, and fewer opportunities for Canadian patients to get innovative cancer therapies. And the question for Canada is not whether MFN is good or bad US policy. I would argue it's just bad US policy in general. The question is, how can Canada protect patient access in a linked global pricing environment? Ottawa has studied the problem, is looking at it. I'll briefly show this slide, and I know folks that are on the line were probably involved in this. Just a few weeks ago, actually, earlier this summer, the Federal Pharmaceutical and Life Sciences Task Force reported on what it thinks Canada needs to do. This was launched and even discussed by the federal health minister in Geneva as part of what Canada is trying to do in response to some of these issues around global pricing. And the report calls for faster reviews from Health Canada, a broader or different view of value in terms of assessing how the value of new medicines, better negotiations or improved negotiations by the Pan-Canadian Pharmaceutical Alliance, and a pricing framework to fit for purpose. And that it had some recommendations for the PMPRB. So lots of there were 39 recommendations. We don't have time to go through all of them now, but Ottawa is looking at the issue. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to our esteemed panel, and I'll do my best to direct traffic as we collectively learn a bit more about this. First, over to Laura. I mean, you've been very busy this week with all of the trade deadlines that have been counting down. Let's start with you. MFN is being presented as a domestic U.S. drug policy pricing issue, but it's also tied to a bigger back and forth around trade, tariffs, and pressure on other countries. So how should Canadians understand the U.S. rationale for this? And what should we be watching in terms of the relationship with our biggest trading partner and our friends down south.
You're on
You're
mute.
on mute. Yeah.
Unmuting now. Thanks for the invitation, Bill. It's great to be with all of you. My background is Canada, US trade and international trade. So I'm going to try to contextualize what's going on within that broader context. MFN is very politically attractive as a slogan in the United States for the Trump administration. We see that it's come out in an executive order, and that is really important because the things that are identified and detailed in an executive order tend to be much more durable in this administration. That's where you want to watch for significant changes in US policy. And so the fact that MFN has an executive order means take it seriously. But the message is familiar and something that is very resonant with Americans, and that's Americans should not pay more for the same drugs than patients do in other wealthy countries. And there's all sorts of reasons for drug prices at the US domestic level that others can get into. But at the top line, that's a message that makes sense to Americans, and also coming into the congressional midterms in November, where Republicans and the president are looking for resonant messages where all sorts of other things are sort of problematic or flying by the wayside. Cheaper drugs for Americans continues to fly very strong. So it's a simple message, but it's got complex economics behind it, and is very, very difficult to implement something meaningful based on this slogan. First of all, as an old trade policy professor at Carleton, I want to point out that when the Trump administration says MFN, this is not the same as the WTO conception of MFN. MFN, or most favored nation, means in the WTO context, non-discrimination among trading partners, and it usually applies to tariffs or market access. It means the best deal you give to any country, you give to all countries. It doesn't apply to prices. And in fact, the WTO stays far away from prices in most contexts unless something's being highly subsidized. So they've taken this new and improved definition of MFN and applied it to drug pricing. The other thing that's important to recognize in the trade policy context is until the Trump administration conditioned us to a highly coercive realpolitik notion of international trade policy, we would never have linked a drug pricing initiative or a health policy initiative with broader tariff measures. But we can fully expect now that if the administration doesn't get what it wants in this sector or another sector, that they could very much throw a tariff on potash or forest products. This is what we saw in the fentanyl case a year and a half ago, and we've been negotiating our way out of those kinds of tariffs ever since. And so the United States has conditioned the trading world to expect a lot less and fight a lot more. Yeah, Bill, we did get a deal this week, but it finalizes nothing. It just gives everyone a little bit of breathing room and some opportunity for strategic planning. So the main Canadian risk, I think, here is not necessarily broad price increases, but the fact that this MFN policy, if successful, changes manufacturers' incentives and can function to delay Canadian launches, can persuade companies to negotiate debt less deeply, to deprioritize Canada. And I think that that is the main thing to be concerned about. However, we have been in drug pricing conversations with, in particular, the Trump administration for many years. Remember, we're going to send buses to Florida and buy all the from Florida and buy all the Canadian drugs. This is part of that same narrative, part of that same momentum. And so it isn't a take it or leave it situation necessarily. It's an opportunity to work with US officials and find ways to solve a US problem while also trying to at least defend Canadian interests interests, if not advance Canadian interests in certain areas. And we're seeing this in foreign policy. We're seeing this in trade policy. Canadians are working with Americans on critical minerals, on Arctic defense, on a host of other areas where we may not necessarily like the how something is being sent to us, but we agree that the what might be an initiative that we can both share. So if we can, sort of swallow our pride and work with the Americans to shape outcomes through constructive engagement, I think this is a real opportunity, especially since Canadian technical experts tend to have a lot of expertise. There's not as much expertise in the US government right now, so they will benefit from well thought out two-way solutions that benefit both sides. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Laura. Lorene, can you share what you understand that MFN changes from an industry perspective? And looking at, you used to sit in a spot where you were determining global prices for medicines in cancer. So you've got some very relevant experience to this issue, not to mention your health economics background, which we never actually go into. Other panelists I have on, they're like, but you're the real deal when it comes to actually understanding the economics around healthcare, as well as bringing a very strong industry perspective. So, Lorene, what does MFN mean from where you sit?
Well, I want to first thank you for the invitation to join everybody here today. And just to disclose that the comments that I have and the perspectives are those of my own and not of my current employer. I'm speaking about this issue from the perspective of somebody with over 30 years of experience, both on the payer as well as the industry side. I've spent time working both domestically here in Canada for almost 3 decades, and most recently, a large amount of time leading a global team in a multinational pharmaceutical company that was operating in over 70 countries while I was there. The impact of this policy is stark, and I know that we've sort of introduced what it is and how it impacts us. I want to underpin the difference between the world we lived in and the world we are going to live in going forward. International price referencing is not new. It's very complicated, and I think some of the words of those who have spoken before me are that it's economically complicated. And as an example, in the old world of international price referencing, where it was list price to list price, the price, for example, in Germany that we set impacts more than 70 countries worldwide. And the health systems are very different, and how they value medicines. I know that, Bill, you spoke about that, how medicines are valued and how rich or the ability to pay for new medicines, but also how prevalent the disease that is in that country all comes into consideration when a company is looking at bringing a new medicine to markets across the globe. The MFN is like no other policy that I've seen in over my 3 decades in the industry. Bill, you've already provided an overview of it and that you spoke about it in terms of it's the first of its kind. It's important to remember that it's on net price and not list price. So it is the first global international price referencing model that is on net price and not list price. And the impact is far reaching, both for today and far into the future. Because as companies look to bring new medicines and invest in commercial efforts required to bring new medicines to markets, such as Canada, some of the decisions around that medicine are made 7, 8, 9 years in advance. And the best example of that is where clinical trials are placed and access, particularly in the cancer realm, of two new innovative trial medicines. Those decisions are made well in advance of the product coming to the market. And so something like MFN has a significant impact because if it's determined that through a policy or a practice that there is no commercial opportunity or limited commercial opportunity in a country, then the company is most likely to invest their spend. And it's considerable in these trials that we have to do for both regulatory and access purposes. They're going to spend it in other markets where they need to generate that evidence to come to market in that particular country. So I agree with those who have spoken before me. As Canadians, it's really important that we continue to defend our Canadian interests, and that we push on how we locally value medicines, and where those medicines will have an impact for us as Canadians going forward.
Thanks so much, Lorraine. We've got some great questions already coming in. It shows that the CanCertainty community, Bob, has already briefed on this and really ready for it. So we're going to get to that shortly. But before we do, Dave, bring this back into your practice as a clinician, as someone who's actually practiced in the United States as well. What does it mean for oncologists and the patients that you care for?
So the big problem is that we're starting out already being dug into a deep hole. We're way behind much of the OECD in access to many anti-cancer drugs. For example, in lung cancer, I cannot get government funded access or like OHIP access to things for MET mutations, KRAS mutations, BRAF mutations, ERB2 lung cancer mutations, etc. So there's a whole bunch of drugs that we already are not accessing, and for quite a long time now, we've been late in getting access of public funding for these new drugs. So we're starting from a deep hole, and the hole's about to get an awful lot deeper. So back a few years ago, when Trump first started saying that it was just going to import drugs from Canada, I voiced my own personal strong opposition to that. Because what that happens then is if companies are giving Canada a deal and suddenly Americans are buying from Canada, then the drug companies are not stupid. They're not going to give Canada as good a deal. So this is a problem. So I expect that a bad situation is going to become much worse. And that's what I think. The other thing, though, globally, the problem is that government price fixing is always a bad idea, in my opinion. I'm not an economist, but I have seen what economists do say about it. The government price fixing, what it does, it results in shortages and end runs. And as an example, in Canada, with the government price fixing through PMPRB and CDA and things like that, it means that we've got a shortage of drugs, we get delayed access, and the end runs are the politicians and government employees who have insurance that will get them the drugs while the public cannot access them, or people without these special insurance programs cannot get. But now when we apply it to the United States also doing this, then I anticipate that's actually ultimately going to slow down investment in new drug development, and this will be a problem for everybody. So the Americans may possibly succeed in getting lower prices for their drugs, but there are going to be fewer drugs to choose from in the future. That's what I think is going to happen. The other thing I think, as far as
keep on going.
As far as helping the Americans have to understand that the reason things are the way they are is because they made it that way. So in 2003, the legislation that said that Medicare had to fund a drug as soon as it was approved by the FDA and they had to accept a price set by the drug companies that guaranteed high prices. So there's one problem with the way that the Americans have funded things traditionally, but also with the whole thing with new drug development that is incredibly expensive and inefficient. And there's huge possibility of savings in drug development, which I think is a prerequisite if we want to keep new drug development at the same level, but with lower prices.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Most of the questions coming in so far are regarding how can the U.S. government enforce or get access to the net prices? And Lorraine, maybe you can back me up on this, but we're going to send a thank you note to all participants here. There's an indication that they want to use a German approach to doing it. In Germany, there's a requirement around price transparency if you want to access that market. There's a small paragraph in Presidential Economic Advisors report about how they intend to do it. The EY report that I referenced earlier, when it's looking at net prices, I understand I wouldn't say back of the envelope, but it looks at the aggregate value of all of the discounts that are provided through PCPA, and an estimate of how much the value of those discounts are provided to private payers. And then it's a best guess around what the average would be in terms of those discounts. But Lorene, can you maybe elaborate a little bit on net versus list that we're seeing come in through the Q&A?
Yeah, so, I think it's as simplistic as US policies, pricing policies prior to MFN. An example is the IRA. And under the IRA, companies are legally obligated to report certain data. And so with that legal obligation comes the ability for the US government to open up any pharmaceutical company's books if you're non-adherent to those reporting requirements. And so it does present, when you look at the split of business worldwide, Canada represents 3% of the global pharmaceutical market. Depending on the company, the US represents 50, 60, 70% of the ability to operate and invest in new and innovative medicines in those trials. And so there is no one company that would jeopardize a failure to report based on, a market that is only 3% of the global pharmaceutical market. Hopefully that answers the questions.
Yeah, and just a quick acronym, IRA is the Inflation Reduction Act, which included a whole bunch of pharmaceutical requirements. It actually allowed the U.S. government plans to even negotiate prices, confidential prices in the U.S. too. So to just complicate things even more, Bob, can you uncomplicate this as a patient leader? Is that possible? And we've got a very obviously smart group of participants here. How should patient leaders, talk about, communicate, engage on this issue? And kudos for CanCertainty for stepping up to even host this webinar. I know this is such an important issue, but what are you thinking on this one?
Well, first of all, I mean, as from a stakeholder perspective, the most important thing right now, of course, is to come up to speed on this thing, to actually, to develop awareness and knowledge on this topic, so that we can effectively advocate when advocacy becomes necessary. So what I'm thinking right now from my perspective is that, I'm caught between the horns of a dilemma here. Do we panic or do we carefully approach this? And I'm kind of halfway between because, Laura has articulated that there's a lot left to develop here between Canada and the United States on policies and opportunities in this whole pharmaceutical sector. So, there's a lot left to do. And I also, having read some months ago, Doug Clark's big article that he published on Substack, pandemic, his first line was "Don't panic yet," and he articulated a whole bevy of policy levers that are being potentially used to affect this policy of MFN. In Medicare and Medicaid and executive order and a whole realm of other things, some of which may not stand the test of litigation. So a lot has yet to develop on this. So we have a lot of learning to do. But one thing that I think we should all kind of settle on is that to take some confidence in the fact that the federal government is taking this seriously. You mentioned, Bill, in the opening that the Pharmaceutical and Life Sciences Sector Task Force report was recently issued. Now, it did not actually mention most favored nation. It reminds me a lot of Mark Carney's Davos speech. He didn't actually mention Trump, but it was definitely the target of this report. And there are some very substantial things that the federal government has highlighted in there as priority advice. And I'll just list a few of them. Number one is that people in Canada should have access to innovative medicines without long delays once they have been assessed for safety and efficacy by Health Canada. You had suggested that that the timeline was only focused on what they can do with Health Canada. They're actually talking about affecting shorter timelines throughout the life cycle. That's something that CanCert has been focused on for quite a while now, is that particular issue. And that the other one, they said that the Canadian market is seen to be a viable market to launch innovative medicines, and that clinical trial networks and data infrastructure power drug development, attract foreign direct investment, and offer treatments to people in Canada. These are very substantial sort of targets that they've laid out that I think that we can all grasp as stakeholders and try to push these onto the other payers. I mean, I just met yesterday with a Minister of Health in Alberta, and there was not a lot of knowledge yet about MFN and how this could be potentially affecting drug access. We have to do a lot as stakeholders to start to actually bring some, I won't call it panic yet, but definitely some urgency around this to start with, to actually start forming solutions to how we deal with the U.S. and forming solutions domestically with regarding policy and solutions to ensure that Canadians continue to have access to important therapies.
Yep. Thanks, Bob. And I could actually even hear the scribbles and the typing happening with folks on the line. Laura, again, this has been a really busy week. We've got a tentative deal. Discussions continue with Washington. What should Canadian governments do on this issue, which obviously isn't, one of the ones that mainly get into the press in terms of an updated CUSMA, but it is something that is having a huge impact as we've heard from our other panelists. Can you build on what Bob said? He mentioned a province out west, who wasn't even tracking on this. What can or should stakeholders and Canadian governments do about this?
Sure. It's a challenging time. I think we can count small blessings, first of all. This issue, the health sector, pharma sector, is not in the top 5 or 6 trade irritants that Canada and the US are going to war over. And you never want to be in those crosshairs. You never want to be that Globe and Mail story at the top of each night. In fact, as a target is probably more EU than Canada. But the choice is to just hunker down and wait until better times come and maybe return to normal, or accept that the US has really not just raised the stakes, but changed the way the game is played. And if that's the case, Canada needs to be very pragmatic and very focused. In 1965, we instituted the Canada-US Auto Pact, and most of you were born afterwards, but you'll be familiar with it because it endured in various ways right up into the present day to structure how automobiles were manufactured, tariff rates, investment rates. It was a managed trade system between the United States and Canada. It wasn't one day Canada and the US woke up and said, hey guys, let's work together better. It was the invention of the automatic transmission, and the Canadian auto sector was so small, it could not develop the economies of scale in which to produce vehicles with automatic transmissions that were saleable at a price Canadians could pay. So they had to join forces with the Americans. The Americans said, yeah, we can take it or leave it. And it was Canadian officials who drew up a very complicated but workable plan with industry, with government, consulting broadly to create this auto pact that has become the bedrock of Canada-US automotive trade. So it seems like something we've always had, but coming towards it, it was built on crisis and built on the really great work of Canadian officials and industry working together. And that's the opportunity that we have now to work domestically to get our own house in order as far as possible, and then to work with the Americans to try to find, if not something that is a solution, something that is a process that recognizes the needs of both sides in order to establish a pricing environment that helps Canada continue to be an attractive, efficient, and strategically important pharmaceutical market.
Thanks, Laura. Lorene, what would make Canada a more predictable and attractive place? I mean, did stuff that Laura was mentioning, do we need a pharma pact to build on the auto pact concept, or is there other things that we could do? I know, Dr. Stewart, you talked about digging our way out of a hole. Like, what are some of the things that Canada could do to at least get to the surface of where we need to be?
I think we need to look at what we do here locally in terms of how we value medicines. There's a lot of build at home or build Canadian policy and approach to how products come to market, how they get marketing authorization, and then how they are reimbursed. And our challenge is really that there are multi-levels. It's very challenging to navigate through. We have a number of medicines, and Bill, you spoke to this in your opening, that never come to market in Canada because of the challenges that we have, whether it's through the drug evaluation program from a value perspective, or whether it's Health Canada and our approaches there. It takes a long time, it's very costly, and the outcome is generally not favorable for Canadians. And so I think there is an opportunity for us to take a sober second look at how we value medicines and appreciate those medicines. Canada needs to pay its fair share of innovation for innovation to continue and for us to have access to innovation going forward.
Bob, you've been involved in those value conversations, and Dave as well, in terms of, patient and clinician input to evaluators, because those are the ones that say, this is a valuable new innovation. Does what Lorene say sort of resonate in terms of where you sit and the kinds of things that you're trying to engage on in terms of our evaluators? I don't know, Bob, do you want to start and then over to Dave?
Well, sure. I mean, our traditional ways of valuing medications are definitely rapidly falling out of date. I mean, and there is a lot of ongoing work. I know that Colorectal Cancer Canada has been doing a lot of work in this area, and CanCertainty is starting to sort of new methods in valuing medications, including societal values and other economic assessments. Right. I mean, we do a very poor job in Canada of recognizing the value that medications provide from an economic perspective, because we're so siloized, right? We don't recognize how drugs may reduce stress on other parts of our healthcare system. So we definitely have a lot of work there to do. I think to Lorene's point. So I think there are a lot of things we can do domestically to better understand the value that medications are delivering to our healthcare system, and perhaps address this whole issue of the upward pressures we're going to be having on pricing.
Thanks, Bob. Dave?
Yeah, so I've long had a problem with the way that the medications are valued. For example, the CDA using $50,000 per quality adjusted life year to set a value. That was the same thing as it back in the 1980s. But meanwhile, a dollar now is worth much less than it was back then, and yet we're using this metric that means nothing. And also the whole way that drugs are compared to each other, so that for example, if you compare sotorasib to docetaxel, for example, and the outcome is more or less the same, therefore the sotorasib should not get funded. But no, it's not. It's like if you're swimming and you use your left arm and then your right arm, and you're saying, well, the right arm is giving more, so you should only pay for what the right arm's doing and forget the left arm, and then you drown because you're only using one arm. But the thing is that these things work differently. They work in different patients, and yet the way that we try to evaluate them and assign them value just does not make any sense because of the fact that they're working in different patient populations, and the whole clinical trials apparatus just does not make sense in so many different ways, and it particularly does not make sense in trying to assign value to something. From my perspective, if I give the drug to a patient and there's nothing else I will get that I can give them that is going to make them feel better, and if it makes their tumor shrink and it makes them feel better, then that's a valuable medication. And yeah, they're way too expensive. But again, the whole way that the clinical trials apparatus is set up is so incredibly inefficient, and it's not cost effective the way that we do clinical research. And that really needs to get fixed if we really want to see some real progress on bringing down prices globally.
Well, that's something that actually talks to one of the questions in the chat as well. What could potentially improve the innovation ecosystem in a way that would make it less costly? And I know, Dave, you've spoken a lot about that. For now, these are extremely expensive to bring a new drug to market with all of the failures, the long timelines to actually get them through phase 3 trials and onto the market. One of the issues with all of the amazing new medicines that you're able to use in clinic, Dave, 25 years ago, there were about 20 patented oncologic medicines. Fast forward 15 years, and there were about 90 over 100, and now there are well north of 100, and those are the ones that are still patented. The ones that aren't, and I'm just using data from the PNPRB, they become generic and obviously get cheaper over time. But the point is, your toolkit is much bigger than it's ever been. But your colleagues in other parts of the world have more access to more of the tools. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that governments in Canada are facing a fiscal wall. Like all of them are running deficits, and they're very worried about how they're going to deal with global economic issues. And Laura, you must be seeing this very regularly as you're talking to folks around the world, and even in the States, they're running massive deficits. So it's a great idea to want to spend more and try to evaluate properly and get new medicines into clinics. But how are Canadian and other governments supposed to also deal with some of the fiscal pressures that they face? That's a big question for anyone to jump in, actually.
I'm going to jump in because, fools rush in where seasoned experts here to tread. But just that I think we have a really important opportunity with what Prime Minister Carney is doing in major projects, in innovation, and in building competitiveness. I'm not partisan, don't support any particular party, but the government has said Canada's economy writ large cannot continue to be in a state of torpor. It needs to lean into a whole host of domestic competitiveness measures, whether that involves whether that it is to reduce dependence on the United States or greater competitiveness in new markets. There's still a real momentum there right now. And if industry stakeholders, and I apologize to any government officials in the room, but if industry stakeholders get busy and put that impetus towards good use, give them recommendations and suggestions that they can use for their resources, so they're not creating mischief in other areas. I think that this is an opportunity, and I see this in so many of the other sectors that I'm working in, is that we've got some, not just breathing room, but running room to reconfigure in terms of competitiveness and efficiency and innovation.
Thanks, Laura. Lorene, does that ring a bell? Do you think so? I mean, I heard some real concerns from your earlier comments. What do you think about Laura's more optimism and what we can do to reconfigure? Is that optimism becoming infectious for you as well, Lorene?
I think there's always opportunities. I think where I continue to express concern, and again, these are my own opinions, is around new products coming to the market. And as you already identified, Bill, the agreements, whether practically executed or in principle executed, are on new product launches. So products that currently exist on the market, there's a very different environment, a very different situation surrounding them. For products coming to market, this is where the challenge is. And I do think that, if we look at, and it was both Bob and David that spoke about how we value medicines, and the fact that for over 30 years we've been using a way to value medicines that at the time was determined to not be the appropriate way to establish value. And 30 years later, we have a very different market with, doublet, triplet, quad therapy, multiple different types of treatments and alternatives within oncology and non-oncology. And the system is not set up to evaluate or value those new and innovative therapies. And, you look at CAR T and you look at gene therapy. A willingness to pay threshold, doesn't work. You look at orphan therapies, the approach doesn't work. And so it is an opportunity for us as Canadians to build something that works. And that started in Canada. And so we built something then, we can build something now.
Excellent. Thank you, Lorene. Bob, are you more optimistic or pessimistic? I mean, Laura sort of laid it down in terms of like a almost pharma pact style of let's figure this out. Lorene seems to agree with that. Where do you lie on the concern versus like let's get this moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think there is opportunities to reconfigure, and I think Lorraine is 100% correct that our HTA and reimbursement systems are no longer fit for purpose. What I'm just considering right now is that we spend a lot of time speaking to drug program managers and bureaucrats. This is definitely a political will issue. We didn't like the FAST program in Ontario was not something that came about from the bureaucracy. It came from political directive. We are going to have to do a lot to shape the political environment in Canada as stakeholders to start to get some momentum towards reconfiguring. And I think that's what the assembled group here today that are watching this webinar and that are hosting this webinar all have we're going to have some subsequent efforts to figure out what our action plan is to drive the political players in Canada to start to address these emerging issues quite urgently. I mean, maybe not as a panic, but as a high urgent, and using perhaps the task force report as part of that rationale for moving forward with urgency.
Thanks, Bob. Dave, I'm going to do something that I've done with you in the past, and that's remember Toy Story, and you pull a string and see what happens. You've written a book on our cancer system and access to cancer therapies. Have at it. What should we do about this in the context of MFN?
I completely agree that this is a time of opportunity, so that we keep on trying to solve problems with old tools that just don't work, and so that the whole way that we're trying to access medications hasn't worked for a long time, and just doubling down on it is not going to make it work better. This needs to be taken as an opportunity to completely change things. And so the analogy I often use is that the average time to develop a new drug was 12 years. That was the average time. COVID came along and suddenly it dropped to 1 year, just because the need was there. And so the whole problem is that there's lots of ways to do things better, more efficiently, much more cheaply, and to get access to things. So we have to completely forget about all the ways we've done it before, and we need a brand new framework, both for new drug development, but then how we pay for them and how we value them. Like one of the problems is that we look at this $50,000 per life year saved, but people that are looking down the gun barrel look at things much differently than people who are healthy. And there's lots of research on this, including, for example, Slevin's article from about 1990, showing that how a cancer patient looks at the importance of things compared to a GP or a nurse. And also Kahneman prospect theory, showing that somebody who's in good shape, they won't accept things that just increase the risk a little bit. Somebody who's facing imminent death will accept things much more readily if there's any possibility at all of benefit. And this is completely lost in the whole way that we value medications. Just the fact that people that are desperate, that are sick, that are suffering, that are dying, they really want access to these medications that can help them, and our system is not providing that properly.
Yeah, thanks. And as I promised earlier, and we had some pre-conversations on this, we're going to circulate some of the references that we've discussed. And Dave, one of those will be your book in terms of how the system's not working right now. What's the title of it? It's quite memorable with the crab on the front of it.
A short primer on why cancer still sucks.
Thank you. Wasn't there a subtitle on that?
Yeah, I can't remember what the subtitle was.
I think it was like,
oh yes, and the subtitle and all the crabby details.
Oh, okay. I thought it was good, and what to do about it or something like that. But I like yours better. This is fantastic. We only have a few minutes left. But one of them, I'll go with the last question that came in. I tried to summarize them, and I have to kudos to some of the folks that I also see are very active on LinkedIn as well. So please keep this going. This is, I think, adding to the conversation through a different modality, being this webinar. What does paying for innovation look like for health products that are the result of Canadian public investment in health research and translational research? You go down to 40, and back in the day in Montreal, and people would celebrate, Singular was invented here. We had a big hand in HIV medicine development, COVID therapeutics, and vaccines too. Is there an opportunity for paying for Canadian innovation in a different way? And Lorena, you've got it. You're not allowed to speak on behalf of your current company, but there's a very important investment in Edmonton in R&D in infectious diseases. What does that mean about Canadian innovation? How to value that?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, and I think there's a question in the questions around paying for innovation for health products that are the result of Canadian public investment. The reality is that Canadian products in Canada alone it's not sustainable. Again, market's too small for there needs to be scalability. And so there is an absolute need for us as a society to look at how we value our medicines, whether they're Canadian innovation or innovation from abroad. Cancer has no borders, and neither should we. And so it's really about how do we get access, continued access to new and innovative medicines. And part of it is that Canada needs to relook at how it assesses value and how it values these new and innovative medicines for patients that need them when they need them.
Yeah, and for Canadian innovators, and not just talking about medical products here, but Laura, a lot of Canadian entrepreneurs and inventors look across the border and say, "Hey, there's an even bigger market down there. What can we do to get access to that and to grow our innovations in Canada?" Right? There are quite a number of people who are north of the border looking south, right? Oh,
Absolutely, and in all sectors, the tech, AI, all the technology sectors are looking at ways to, nurture innovation domestically, but scale it globally. You have to have both parts, and I think the imperfect answer is you have to find ways to generate rewards during the development cycle and support research and support education so that there are benefits accruing at that level, even if you accept that that innovation, if successful, is going to take off and fly in the world.
people used to use Blackberries around the world. Remember that? I think I still have one in my drawer somewhere. Um, Bob, last word to you. I know we're almost at time. Maybe can you wrap it up from a CanCertainty perspective and next steps? We are going this video is recorded, will be posted on CanCertainty's YouTube channel. Any other last thoughts to help close it out, Bob?
Sure. So, first of all, everyone stay tuned because CanCertainty is definitely going to be organizing some more activities around this particular issue, and looking to develop some strategies and tactics to try to, affect some reconfiguration that we talked about today. So, that's to come. But I also like to tell our assembled audience that we have a couple more webinars that we're going to be scheduling over the next couple of months. The two topics that we have in the queue right now. One is called Access Beyond the Center. It's addressing rural and remote equity in regards to how patients in rural and remote Canada access equitable care for cancer. And the next one, we're going to do another one on system readiness and implementation. That one's going to be called If You Fail to Plan, You Plan to Fail. And that's going to be addressing a lot of the complexities around implementation, planning, and from a provincial level. So stay tuned for those. And I want to thank our experts today, Laura, Lorraine, and David, for providing such incredible insights into what we're dealing with MFN, and of course to you, Bill.
Thanks so much, Bob. Stay tuned for those webinars, but also the thank you email. We're going to get you quite a list of links to the GI Society. Just came out with an animated infographic and an article on this. There was an article in City TV and in the conversation recently too. This is a tough one, and everyone's trying to deal with it in different ways. So let's keep this going, and thanks so much for the dozens of people who joined today to help contribute to the discussion. Bye, Laura. Bye, Lorraine. See you, Dave, and I'll talk to you soon, Bob. Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye now.